key points that bring to your attention. This is Armin Siedlecki. He likes questions, so don't be shy about asking questions. Right?
Please interrupt.
We'll break about 10:30 for about 10 or 15 minutes, or whenever is a good time for you, or when you get that glaze look over your eyes from too much information. He's very interesting. I'm looking forward to learning a lot from him. Lunch will be out in the lobby at noon. The presentation's been videotaped, and yesterday was videotaped, and we'll make those available later at our earliest convenience. And his PowerPoints will be made available probably on the SEPTLA website. In the left-hand corner, the navigation bar says workshops and presentation. And we'll get those as soon as you can. And it's being videotaped because of Phil, so thank you, Phil. That's a valuable service. Now, for those of you who didn't hear Armin's introduction yesterday, I want to let you know he has a Ph.D. in Old Testament from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. In the past, he has taught courses in biblical studies and religious studies at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, Drury University in Springfield, Missouri, and Emory University. Armin has been a cataloger at the Pitts Theology Library at Emory University since 2001, and he's been head of cataloging since 2007. He works primarily with German and language materials, including the Pitts Theology Library's German Reformation collection. He is an active member of the Society of Biblical Literature and of ATLA, where he is chair of the Technical Services Interest Group. During the RDA testing period last year, he served as chair of the RDA test group at Emory University. Emory, as you know, was an official test site for RDA in the U.S. So please give Armin another warm welcome as he brings relevant knowledge and practical hands-on experience that will be very valuable to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm welcome. If you haven't picked up the materials in the back, you can do so really at any time, but make sure you have one of each package back there. There should be, I believe, 10 stacks altogether. Make sure you get one of each. Some are single pages, but most of them are about 3 or 4 pages stapled together. And we will address these handouts as we go along. What I've prepared today are 4 modules. They're 4 independent PowerPoint presentations, and they are all based on materials provided by the Library of Congress. The training materials and the PowerPoints were used in the trainer session that I attended in preparation for the RDA test, and they were designed to be used in RDA training. So I have taken these and have adapted them, changed a few. I've taken out a few of the slides that they have used. There were some. One of the modules, I think, had 5 or 6 slides on cartographic materials, and I'm not sure how many of us really catalog a lot of maps, but if you do and you came here to learn about cataloging maps, I apologize. But I've tried to keep the material relevant. I've changed a couple of the examples to reflect the more theological orientation in which most of us work. The exercises, I've designed 8 exercises. Those were mine. They were from books, photocopies from books in our collection at the Pitts Theology Library at Emory. And we're going to go through these and create some RDA records. The first few are just filling in a couple of fields, but then toward the end we're going to create some RDA records with core elements. As Donna said, I encourage questions, so please, if I go too fast, if I go too slow, if I confuse you or if I bore you, please stop me, interrupt me. Don't throw fruit, please, but other than that. I would also like to thank Westminster Theological Seminary for the use of their photocopier and their paper for all these handouts. I believe I'm going to have to volunteer to plant trees after this to atone for this. I should also mention one of the handouts requires some assembly, the green one. It's a trifold. I don't think I need to provide instructions for that, but that's really more for reference. It's the sort of thing you can keep at your desk to know what the vocabulary is for some of these new fields. Okay, I mentioned I've got 4 modules, 4 presentations. The first one is a general overview. It's the shortest of the presentations. It'll cover a little bit of what we talked about yesterday, so if you weren't here yesterday, that's no problem. Everything you really need to know should be here. If you were here yesterday, there's not that much overlap. So I think 2 or 3 slides are the same, but that should be all. The second module, the second presentation, is the longest. It will deal with cataloging manifestations. It is the longest because that's what we do. As catalogers, we catalog manifestations of books. If you don't know what a manifestation is in the FRBR framework, you will learn that very soon. The third module and the fourth module, I hope to get through the first and the second this morning, and then in the afternoon we will talk about the third module, which will include works and expressions. Again, FRBR vocabulary, and we'll talk about this and address it. And the final module will address relationships, one of the central elements in RDA. I am not including a lot of information on creating authority records. Do many of you in here create authority records as part of their work? I know some do, but I know it's not something that many catalogers do, so I've tried to stay to bibliographic records. I will address some authority data as it is relevant, but this will not include training for creating authority records, or very little reference to that. I've also tried to focus mostly on printed books, printed materials. Maybe that's a little ironic because I spent a lot of time yesterday talking about the need for RDA because we have such diverse material now, we collect diverse material beyond the printed page. That's true. The reason why I've focused on books is because most of us still have a majority of books in our collections, and also because the rules for cataloging books should transfer fairly easily to other formats. RDA is concerned with elements rather than format-specific descriptions, as AACR2 was. So whatever you learn here should be transferable and adaptable to other formats fairly easily. If there are a couple of exceptions, I will point them out, but that was the rationale for sticking to books, because that's what most of us are most familiar with and what most of us deal with most of the time. So, jumping into our first module, the overview. I think this is one of the overlapping slides from yesterday. RDA is the successor to AACR2, but it is not AACR3. RDA is quite different. It is not simply an expansion of AACR2. It is not simply an addition to account for further media that are being collected. It is really a different way of looking at information. For the cataloger, our daily work will not necessarily change all that much. For the user, the records will not necessarily look all that different. So there's a good deal of continuity, I believe, to the way records are constructed according to RDA, to AACR2. But the way we think about what we do, I think, is quite different in RDA. And I think it's quite useful. It's really helped me to think about the way I construct records and organize information in a different way, and I found it very helpful and really very conducive for the context in which I catalog, the online context. RDA is a content standard, not a display standard, as was AACR2. There is an appendix, Appendix D specifically, in RDA, in the RDA toolkit, for ISBD, and Appendix E for AACR2 style for access Library of Congress will continue to use ISBD punctuation conventions, but this is not something that is actually part of RDA. RDA is a content standard, not a display standard. It is also not an encoding standard. I assume that most of us here catalog in MARC. I know I do, and that was my assumption, and our examples today will relate to MARC cataloging. But keep in mind that RDA is not restricted to MARC, but that the rules for cataloging in RDA can be applied to other formats. It can be applied to an XML platform, for example, if you catalog mods, or DAX if you're an archivist. So it is not an encoding standard, it is not a display standard, but it is a content standard. It includes authority data instructions. Like I said, I'm not going to focus on that a lot today. I will talk about it as it becomes important, but I will not talk about how to construct an RDA authority record today. And authorized variant access points and elements. There's some new RDA vocabulary, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Will, for now, be documented in authority records, which is what we've been doing. We've been using authority records for authorized access points in our MARC bibliographic records. RDA has controlled vocabularies. Only a few of them are closed, specifically content, media, and carrier types. The ones on your green handout, trifold. This is closed vocabulary. If you construct fields 336, 337, 338, which are content, media, and carrier, we'll talk about each of these in detail. The vocabulary that can be used is given on this sheet. Most of the vocabulary is open. There are lists that should be used, but if an appropriate term cannot be found for description, the cataloger can apply his or her judgment to do so. Some vocabularies will be registered on the web. In fact, if you do a Google search for any of these, you will most likely find some interesting lists. There's a good deal of documentation out there. But if you look at training document 1, there's a list of elements that have vocabulary, controlled vocabulary, and you see most of that list, the first page and a half, are all the lists of controlled vocabulary that are not closed. Halfway down, book format, for example, there is a list of authorized or controlled vocabulary that should be used, but if you are cataloging something weird, and you don't find an appropriate term, an appropriate controlled term to describe it in RDA, the numbers on the left here refer to RDA numbers in the RDA, in the RDA toolkit. If you don't find an appropriate term, you can supply your own. So that's encouraging. I think it's good to have controlled vocabulary, but it's good that most of them are in fact open and can be supplemented with your own judgment. There's a small list at the bottom of the second page, at the back of your page here, which talks about closed vocabulary, mode of issuance, which really relates to a fixed field, a single unit, a serial unit, or an integrating resource, which is what we've been using now. Media type, carrier type, content type, status of identification, groups of instruments if you're a music cataloger, instrumental music for orchestra, and again, status of identification. These are closed vocabularies. You cannot add terms, your own terms for these. So this is a good reference. All of these training documents are references. It's the sort of thing you want to keep on your desk. It's not the sort of thing you want to read first page to last page, much like RDA. Don't try to read RDA cover to cover as it is, or first screen to last screen. It's a reference tool that should be entered at any given point at whatever is relevant to you. RDA addresses user tasks. This derives from the International Cataloging Principles, which were published in 2009. The highest principle, the prime directive in the ICPs, are convenience of the user. Always something to keep in mind. And every rule in RDA was constructed with these principles in mind: the convenience of the user and the understanding of the user's tasks. The user is interested in finding, identifying, selecting, and obtaining a particular resource. Or with regard to authority data, functional requirements for authority data, to find, identify, contextualize, and justify the use of an authorized form for an author or a title that would be relevant to the user. And the rules in RDA were constructed with these principles in mind, or should be justified on the basis of these principles. There are some examples here. For example, if you provide a variant title, or if RDA talks about providing a variant title, the rationale behind it is it should be used if it is considered to be important for identification or access. Identification, if you remember, was the second principle under FRBR. Access actually should be obtained, sorry. They changed the vocabulary. Sorry about that. It should be obtained. The length of a film, for example, should be given because it is important for identification or selections. FIS, find, identify, select, obtain. Or obtain access could be FISA if you want. So all of the rules in RDA and our work as catalogers should be based on these ideas: the convenience of the user and the understanding of the user's involvement in obtaining information, finding, identifying, selecting, and obtaining. There are appendices in RDA for transitions. I am very grateful for these. There's Appendix D, which talks about ISBD to RDA. There are a few changes from the current practice. Most of the punctuation rules, for example, will be virtually identical in RDA, as they were in AACR2. And it also talks about the adaptation of MARC 21, the MARC 21 bibliographic format, to RDA. Appendix E is a presentation and punctuation of access points. Again, few changes from the current practice. The structure of RDA. How many of you have worked with the RDA toolkit or have played around with it? Okay. A few people have. So this is just a broad introduction of how it is structured. You remember AACR2 was based on chapter per format description. RDA is structured on the basis of elements that are relevant for description. There's a general introduction at the beginning. That's the sort of thing you might actually want to read if you're interested. There is a large section. The main section is about identifying elements, entities, and their attributes. Chapters 1 through 7 are concerned with work, expression, manifestation, and item. The WEMI hierarchy in FRBR. We'll get back to that a little bit later. Chapters 8 through 16 are concerned with persons, family, corporate body, and place. So chapters 1 through 7 are mostly concerned with constructing title-related access points. Chapters 8 through 16 are concerned with constructing personal access points or access points relating to a creator, editor, translator, curator, and so on. The relationships between all of these entities are described, with a proper description of the relationships for these entities are described in chapters 17 to 22 and 24 through 32. There are appendices appendices, as I mentioned. Most of these, or several of these, have to do with making the transition from AACR2 to RDA, and then there's a glossary explanation of terms.
What happened to 23? Chapter 23.
Good question. Do you want to look? Let's look at chapter 23. This is the RDA toolkit for those of you who haven't seen it yet. There are 3 tabs, RDA. There's some tools here, which include mappings and workflows. This is where you can customize your workflow. This is part of the RDA toolkit. It's not part of the RDA rules, but they're tremendously valuable tools, and you have additional resources here, including AACR2. But let's go to RDA. Subjects of a work. The reason why that wasn't specified is, even though we have guidelines for the functional requirements for bibliographic data and the functional requirements for authority data, functional requirements for subject authority data has not been officially published yet. It is being worked on by a working group at IFLA, but it is not currently available yet. It will be added to RDA as it becomes available. 23. If you construct subject data, of course, you will do that as you always have, using LC classification tables, call numbers, subject headings, and so on. So there are really no changes there. Okay. RDA is not organized by the class of materials. There are no separate chapters for books, printed music, and so on. As I mentioned, what you learned today, which will mostly be focused on books, should be applicable to other formats or should be adaptable to other formats fairly easily. Basic goals are to identify and to relate. Identify, define, describe, and then establish the relationship of the different elements that you are describing. RDA is not to be read linearly. I think I mentioned this a few times yesterday. It is meant to be used as an electronic resource. You can jump in really at any point via keyword searches to find out what the rules of description are for a particular keyword or particular issue, particular problem, particular element that you're describing, and so on. You can also go directly to elements from the table of contents, as we did in order to find what is contained in chapter 23. That is the table of contents, and you see it expanded hierarchically. And there are links. You follow the links. That's one of the reasons why the print version of RDA is so difficult to read, because you often have references like construct as in 3.2.21. Obviously, in a print version, you would have to flip back and forth, or you would have to quote all of that. Again, in an online environment, you simply click, follow the links, and then find the information that you are looking for. There will be some duplication of content, and that is needed for context, of course. But again, that was one of the problems that people encountered with reading the print version of RDA. You will probably see less of that duplication if you're doing keyword searches or if you're simply looking things up. It's a reference tool. So what is where in RDA? And that's what the next few training documents relate to. The very good resource tools If you're familiar with the pre-RDA context, the context in which we've all been cataloging, the column on the left talks about the elements of description. The column in the middle provides the RDA terminology. And the column on the right contains the chapter that it is covered in. Under main entry, for example, third of the way down, choosing the main entry, if you want to read about choosing the main entry, the RDA terminology for that would be recording the primary relationship between the manifestation and the work embodied in the manifestation. It sounds a bit confusing, but once you get used to the vocabulary, it's actually fairly straightforward. It is described in chapter 17.8 and also in chapters 6 and 19. This is where you will find information about constructing what ACR2 would have called the main entry. Training document number 3, the longest one, talks about 4 elements. It identifies all the elements and the RDA number or the RDA chapter where it can be found. It is marked with an asterisk if it is considered RDA core or core if. Core meaning it has to be there for a proper complete record. It needs to be included. Core if means it has to be included if the situation calls for it. Core, for example, would be, well, core if, for example, would be an author. There should be a statement regarding an author if the book has an author. If it is a collection of essays that has an editor, it cannot be core. You cannot supply what is not there, what is not relevant to that situation. So author is core if it is relevant to material that you're cataloging. That's the difference between core and core if. The 245 title, that's a core. You've got to have something in the 245. That is not negotiable and really not dependent on the situation. Author, in many cases there will be an author, but there will be situations where this is not the case. So that's the difference between core and core if. There are some that are marked with a plus sign. Those are additional elements that LC considers core for their own cataloging. You're not required to include these unless you prefer to follow LC's practice. Personally, I think it's a good idea. If LC does it, we should probably do it as well. And I should mention, if something is not at all marked, you can still use and enter this element in your records, but it is not necessary for a core record, or a core record as considered by LC. Yes, Christine?
When I look at this and I see that LC is setting up a separate core, for people who are in the simplification camp, it's a little discouraging because it looks like they're again setting up, like an LC rule interpretation. And again, catalogers will have to look at 2 places. And I would hope that RDA would be good enough that we could say, okay, this is the core set, and that LC would be willing to follow that. But I guess that's not going to happen from what you're showing us here. So
it's beyond our control.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I see what you mean. Looking at what they consider core, that is not necessarily core of RDA, they all seem like reasonable fields of information. So I mean, it is good information to include, but I agree. It is not necessarily conducive for simplification, which again would be one of the useful things if you're planning on transferring data to different platforms or different schemas. Yeah, that's a good point. That will be LC's decision to make. But we can create complete records with core information, even if we do not include these LC core informations. So like I said, I think this is the longest of the training documents. Again, we're not going to go through this step by step, but it is a good reference. It's the sort of thing you will want to refer to or use as you construct RDA records, as you think about RDA, and so on. sorry, that should be training document 5. It says 4 on the slide, that should be 5. Training document 4 is simply a different listing of LC's core elements. That is all the core elements in RDA and the core elements that LC considers core. It's simply all of these pulled together. So if you simply want to follow that structure and you're not concerned about adding additional information that would go beyond the core, training document 4 is the one you want to look at. Training document 5, finally, is a mapping document relating MARC 21 fields to RDA elements. Again, this is one that I particularly find quite useful. If you're working on field, any given field, 300, carrier description. This is the new way of designating the 300 field in RDA. And it gives instructions repeat as needed. It's repeatable. It gives specific instructions for individual MARC fields in training document number 5. The full description and the rules would be, you would be able to find in the mapping resource. Let me go back to the RDA toolkit. So I think that is in the log. Oh, it's still there. RDA mappings. You click on tools, the second tab. RDA mappings. MARC bibliographic to RDA mapping. Here you have the complete list of your MARC tags. The 100. Personal name. Full statement of that is given in RDA 9.2.2. First indicator B 9.2.2. C, the title of a person, 9.4. And you can click on these and it will take you to RDA. So you can switch over to the left. Session did timeout. Sorry about that.
It says it's loading.
Emory University is still up there. So, oh, okay, good. Good. So this was 9.4, I think is what I clicked on. 9.4, title of a person. So title of a person is a word or phrase indicative of royalty, nobility, or ecclesiastical rank or office, or rank of address for a person of religious vocation. And these titles are included in RDA. They were often omitted in AACR2 unless they were needed for disambiguation in RDA. They should be included in bibliographic records at least. So that's where you will find more complete access to mappings from MARC 21 to RDA. Assuming that most of us are familiar with MARC 21, this is where you go from what you know to where you find information about the new standard. And document 5 is a quick reference for that. Okay. A few words on terminology. FRBR and FRAD attributes are elements in RDA, functional requirements for bibliographic data and authority data. FRBR and FRAD group 1 entities are work, expression, manifestation, and item. There are group 1 entities which relate to work, expression, manifestation, item relating to the title. Group 2 entities, I talked about this a little bit yesterday, which relate to persons, groups, or corporate entities that are involved in the production or in the creation or editing or translation of any of these group 1 entities. Group 3 entities relate to subjects. That is still being worked out. But you've got your titles, your authors, and your subjects to break it down very simply. But the first one, Group 1 entities include work, expression, manifestation, and item. Group 1 entities, here's a book, which can be a door prop. If you think of a book as a door prop, where in the hierarchy would it fall? Work, expression, manifestation, or item? The item is the only physical version of that, or the only physical entity. The door prop would be an item. The publication of that book at any bookstore, any copy, would be a manifestation. The stack of trading document number 5 at the back table would be a manifestation, or if I talk about the stack, I would be talking about the manifestation of trading document 5. The document that you actually hold in your hand is the item. So that distinction, I think, is relatively easy, fairly straightforward. A little more complex is if you ask questions about who translated a particular book, that would relate to the book's expression. Or who wrote the book originally, that would be the work. I've worked my way backwards through the hierarchy. Yesterday I think I started with work, expression, manifestation, and item. This time I started with the, perhaps that's a better way to explain it. Started with the item, with the physical item, and then worked my way back. So from the physical book in your hand, the publication of that book would be the manifestation. The translation, for example, that you are reading is a particular expression. Another translation of the same book would be a different expression. But all of them would be expressions of the same work. So if this trading document was originally written in French, the English version would be considered the expression. The French would also be considered an expression, but the document itself, originally published in French, would also be the work. Does that make sense? Okay. A couple of other changes that you can expect to see. Instead of headings, RDA prefers the term authorized access point. It's broader. Some people might say that you've removed the ambiguity simply by broadening the term. Perhaps, but, well, it is as it is. Author, composer, etc. Is the creator. The term creator would apply to any of these. And this is why RDA can address different formats. You don't need different chapters to address different formats. If you're talking about music, the composer would be a key word. If you're talking about books, author would be a key term. Creator would apply to both of them. So you can set up the rule for establishing description of the creator, and you don't have to establish different rules for author or composer, or simply add modifications to the role. The main entry in RDA is generally called the preferred title, and the authorized access point for the creator, if appropriate, that is if the book has a title, has an author. The uniform title is the preferred title plus information to differentiate. The preferred title in the what we used to call the uniform title, the preferred title would refer to the work. Information used to differentiate would relate to the expression. We'll talk about this in Module 3, or a conventional collective title. Again, we'll talk about this when we talk in Module 3. A couple of other changes. Instead of C reference, whenever there were C references in ACR2, RDA would use variant access point as an alternative vocabulary. Physical description, carrier description is the preferred term, so the 300 field now relates to carrier description, not to physical description. Obviously, when you're talking about online resources, it's hard to talk about physical descriptions because you're not really talking about something physical. But you can describe the carrier description, online resource. So it's more relevant in that sense and more applicable to a broader field of formats. The chief source is the preferred source. And finally, the GMDs, subfield H and the 245, general material designation, has been broken up into 3 separate fields, 336, 337, and 338. For some people, this is really the heart of RDA. It certainly what strikes people most when they come across an RDA record and they haven't worked with RDA before. One of those weird fields. Media type, 336, carrier type, 337, and content type, 338. Core elements, I've talked about core elements. Those are based on attributes mandatory for a national level record, FRBR and FRAD. Yes?
In slide back, why did what were the plus signs after, what did they mean?
Oh, media type and carrier and content type.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, yeah.
I thought we were reading the expansion thing.
Oh, no. They actually meant plus in this case. Sorry, that wasn't clear. But yeah. The one has been broken up into 3. That's what put in there. Training document 4 summarizes LC's core elements, or what is considered core by LC. So what I'd like to do is conclusion of this first module, do a little quiz. This was also developed by the Library of Congress. It's kind of cute, I think. A little over my shoulder because this actually doesn't show up in my screen here. Let's see. There it is. Okay. Okay. An authorized access point is an approved entry to the library stacks. Could call it that, I suppose. An established form of a name for a person, family, corporate body, etc. Or one of the ways a user can find a resource. See? Is that the majority consensus?
You could argue all 3 almost.
That's true. The first one would probably not be included in RDA. Although you could argue that. That's very true. But B or C?
B.
B. Very good choice. Did you find the other answer? B and C are in fact relevant for that. Go back. Yes, that is one approach to finding and identifying a resource. A preferred title is the title formerly known as uniform. I like the way you phrase that. A title recommended by 9 out of 10 booksellers. Or C, the form of a title used in creating an authorized access point for a work. Any preferences? A? Say NC.
NC, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see what they give you. NC would be also correct. So A and C were both correct. 3, a manifestation is an idea in someone's brain, a publication waiting to be cataloged, or an apparition or a ghost. A.
B.
B. What would A be? The work, yeah. A would relate to the work. In fact, I think it'll probably tell us that if we click on it. No, that's work. Which I'm curious to see what they have under C. And B, the publication waiting to be cataloged. Elements are attributes and characteristics that identify an entity, air, water, fire, and earth, or the building blocks of an RDA record. Preference?
A and C.
A and C. Yes. Elements are the attributes from the Ferber and Frad conceptual models. I'm not going to click on B here. Yes. An expression is a grin, grimace, smile, frown, etc. A work realized in the form of alphanumeric or musical notation, sound, image, movement, etc., or a significant word or phrase. B. It's an odd way of putting it, but it is indeed. A Ferber work is realized in this way. The work is the idea, the Platonic idea. And once it enters the realm of language, as Augustine would say, the fallen realm of language in which we are forced to live, it becomes an expression. Once it's published, it becomes a manifestation. And once we use it as a door prompt, it becomes an item. Users' tasks are goals catalogers should address in their records, include find and identify, are assignments to be finished before readers earn their library privileges, or include select and obtain.
A, B, and C.
A, B, and D. Yeah. Mhm. A, B, and
I
D.
mean,
Pardon?
never mind, I said the wrong one,
Oh, no, I knew.
I meant A, B, and D.
Right. Mhm. Yes. Did you find the other answer? Main ICP principle. Convenience of the user includes find and identify, and select and obtain. And that is the end of the quiz. Any questions about the overview? This takes us to the end of our first module. Yes?
In the RDA format, we move from MARC, which is author, composer, creators. But if we were looking at like the Magic Flute and it listed both Mozart and Chicken, are there differentiations in the creators to say this is the person who did the text, this is the person who did music?
Yes.
Okay.
You would do that by including a relator term. You would have Mozart, delimiter E, composer, Schikaneder, delimiter E. I think librettist is an authorized term, but I would have to look that up. But yeah, yes, we'll include that. In fact, if you see RDA records, you will often see
language is really comfortable because the XML markup, which is what I mostly work with, is based on elements and attributes. So it's a language that, you know, people who are dealing with the non-MARC world are, you know, super comfortable with, which is really nice, and easy to translate over if we're dealing with a, you know, Dublin core or one of those other non-MARC structures. So it's kind of neat.
Thank you. That is definitely one of the advantages. It'll make it easier for catalogers to talk to non-catalogers or to other metadata providers.
Right. Yeah.
Organizers, yeah. Computer programmers. Yes. Absolutely. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Like I said, this was the shortest of our modules. Let's get started on module 2 before the break. To do a little bit. Otherwise, it would be a very long module, I think. Again, this is the longest one because this is what most of us spend most of our time doing. We identify and describe manifestations so that users can find, identify, select, and obtain them. Okay. What am I cataloging? It's the manifestation. That is what we do. But the MARC bibliographic record also includes information about work and expression and sometimes item. We have a 500 note saying copy to autograph by author that contains information about the item. If you have a 240 field, it contains information about the work and the expression. So the MARC bibliographic record contains information about all of them, but is mostly concerned with the manifestation. MARC and FRBR 100 and 240 contains information about the work and the expression. 245 through 260 and 490 includes information about the manifestation. This is sort of the heart of the record. 300 and other 3XX fields includes information about the expression and manifestation, possibly about the work. But we will talk about them now as they relate to the manifestation. 5XX fields can relate to any of them. 7XX relates to work, expression, manifestation. We will talk about that when we talk about works and expressions in Module 3. And 8XX also relates to work, expression, sometimes manifestation if you have a URL, for example, connecting to an online resource. So right now we'll talk about fields 245 through 5XX. Talk about persons, works, and expressions in Module 3 after lunch. The LC template, or OCLC data record, includes 3 elements, 3 attributes. The mode of issuance, which you might remember is one of the closed lists for controlled vocabulary, really relates to the fixed fields, M, S, or I for a single monograph, either a serial publication or an integrating resource. The content type and Media type is not included here because it's not actually core, although it is LC core. If you put it at 336 and a 338, you might as well put it at 337, I think. But what you will see, or as you construct RDA records, the MARC coding for RDA bibliographic records is value I for ISBD in the fixed fields, not A for AACR2, because it is no longer AACR2. But it follows the ISBD rules of display. And they are also marked in the 040 field with RDA in subfield P. And they should be designated with ENG, assuming you're cataloging in English, with ENG in subfield B. As other countries start working with RDA, and there's a good deal of interest in it in Europe, and some libraries in Europe have started working with RDA and have RDA FRBRized catalogs. Place in Italy that has a very good one, I think. Their records would be in a different language, so it should be coded accordingly. Yes? Pardon?
DLC?
Oh, DLC is Library of Congress. Yeah, DLC is their symbol.
Oh.
So if you create an original record, it would be the OCLC symbol of your libraries. I'm at the Theology library at Emory, ours would be EMT. It's usually automatically populated if you create a record in connection. Sources of materials for printed, sources of information, sorry, for printed materials. If the resource lacks a title page, title sheet, or title card, or image thereof, use as the preferred source of information the first of the following sources that bears the title. And really go down that list. The cover is acceptable as a source of information. The caption, if you're cataloging incunabula, books published before 1500, that is often the only thing you have. Title pages didn't come in until after 1500. A masthead, or an image of a masthead if you're cataloging a newsletter, or a colophon, or an image of a colophon. Mostly relevant for railroad cataloging in this particular case, I think. So the title page is still the most preferred source of information, but other preferred sources of information include these. One of the main principles of the international cataloging principles, in addition to convenience of the user, is take what you see and accept what you get. We transcribe what we see in the 245. General guidelines are given in RDA 1.7.1. Addresses the transcription of what is on the resource. Regarding capitalization, we follow Appendix A because RDA is not a display standard. Capitalization is not as important. Most searches are not case sensitive, or usually are not case sensitive. So capitalization in Appendix A should be followed, and it's virtually the same in almost all cases as what we have been doing in AACR2. So you still capitalize what you would normally capitalize in an AACR2 record. Regarding punctuation, abbreviations, inaccuracies, and those are not just symbols, initials, numbering, generally follow what is on the source. Those might make a difference in searching, whether you have an abbreviation or a word spelled out. Obviously, depending on what you search for, you will end up with different results. Capitalization will not matter. That's why capitalization can be adapted. situation, we generally follow what is on the source. Yes?
I see the word generally follow what's on the source. So there are exceptions even in RDA.
One exception would be for serials, normalization of serials. The title of a serial can be normalized. And again, that is to keep the convenience of the user in mind. And you would provide an alternative access point with the title that appears on the serial that you have enabled. So that would be the one exception. And again, that's the rule for that is based on the other ICP main principle, the convenience of the user. It's because of the annoying habit that serial publishers have of changing the title of a serial just ever so slightly every 2 months, it seems.
So I would see, no matter what kind of format I'm cataloging, I would see transcription only in 1.7.1.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm still trying to get unlocked
Right.
from ACR2.
Right. Right. If there are different conventions relating to different carriers, you would have a link in that section, taking you to that section.
Okay.
But this would be the entry point for you. Yes. In some cases, that might be all you need to know. In some cases, it would be the entry point that will lead you to other sections. But you would follow the links. Yes.
Why wouldn't you correct an inaccuracy? I'm just thinking of what I catalog thesis, and sometimes the students misspell in the title, and it won't look very nice in the 245 if I'm not correcting it.
Yeah, that's true. In the past, what people often did was include a sick, as I see
Right.
in square brackets. That interrupts the alphanumeric statement. That interrupts the title statement. And if you're doing a search, it could in fact change your search results. It's also transcribing what is on the resource makes it more easy for machine readable technology to enter data. Yes?
But following the theory that we're doing this for the user, wouldn't the user assume that the author of a thesis on fish would know how to spell fish? Or something like that. So wouldn't they search that way? So therefore, aren't we making it harder on the user by using an inaccuracy in that case?
Well, yes and no. If there is an inaccuracy, you would record the correct title in an alternative title statement. You would add a 246. The user would definitely find that record. But the title statement in the 245 would be as based on what appears on the resource.
But then it makes it look like the cataloger mistyped it. You know, if you're just transcribing the 245, something that's misspelled, it looks like we didn't know what we were doing when we were typing it in. Because there's no sick there to say, I knew what I was doing, but it was misspelled on the title.
That's true. There is the danger of that. One would hope that the patron would then go to the book and see, oh, it actually is spelled that way. So yeah, until the user will look at the resource, that's true. That is possible.
And
Yes.
that corrected spelling would display in the OPAC if you wanted to. So it'll be more obvious that you do what you're doing.
If there's an alternative title statement, yes.
You could even say, tell your system administrator, put a label, catalog of new issue 30.
You could include a 500 note, actually, which would display in your
Title
OPAC,
misspelled on
saying title
PT or
misspelled.
something.
Right. Or title page, you wouldn't have read it.
Title page.
Right. A title is spelled on title page. And you would provide the alternative access point for the 246. Yes?
I was thinking about the user here, and we're saying we want to help the user, but there are users who would want to know that error. For example, rare book users who would be looking for an edition that had an error, and if we didn't record that, they wouldn't be able to identify that edition. Now, I know they're a minority of the user base, but on the other hand, there's something to be said for transcribing those kind of errors, and also providing access to the correct. On the other hand, if students are making typos, I would call them up and say, hey, you guys, reprint your dissertation.
Right,
You can do
that's
that.
true. For a thesis, that should be possible, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's true.
So there are some users who would want to see that, I think.
Yeah, but when I create ECRMB records, I certainly always describe what is on the resource that I'm doing that. But yeah, I think that's true. Other questions about representation? Okay. Found capitalization. I mentioned that capitalization is largely what we have been doing. Let me qualify that a little bit. RDA actually allows for complete capitalization if the title page has all capital letters. That is a possibility. You can do so, or you can change it. Again, it's not a display standard, so you have that option. Personally, I don't like it, but if you want to be very strict about following transcription as it is, you can capitalize every word that is in fact capitalized on the title page. So you can do a true transcription. That is possible. Or you can change it just based on what you've been doing so far in ABCR2. Core elements from chapter 2 to identify manifestations and items. There's the identifier for the manifestation, a character string associated with a manifestation that serves to differentiate that manifestation from other manifestations. Very often ISBN number. Really not much of a change from what we've been doing so far, but that is core because ISBN identifies a particular manifestation. Not an expression, not a word, not an item, but it is one of the clearest identifiers for a manifestation. An internationally recognized identifier, that they mean ISBN, should be used if possible. Other identifiers are also possible. Again, if you do rare book cataloging, for example, you can cite one of the accepted bibliographies. I catalog a lot of Luther books. Benzing's Lutherbiographie is one of the standard reference works, and there are numbers for each entry. It could be cited, because obviously a 16th century work would not have an ISBN. Yes?
Or, I'm not a cataloger, so don't laugh at this question. But does that mean then that if you, like brought a book in from OCLC that had multiple ISBNs on it, you should remove all but the exact ISBN?
No, I would record all of them.
Okay, well, that's what I thought, but
Yes.
it does, that's, if you say you're using that as your exact identifier, shouldn't you remove all the others then? No, that doesn't logically follow. Okay, obviously I'm not a cataloger.
No, you could have multiple ones because the paperback edition could be different from the hardback edition,
Right,
for example.
but I'm physically
Right.
cataloging the one.
If you're cataloging only the
Yeah.
the paperback edition, then you can limit it to the paperback edition ISBN.
Right.
That's true.
But should I remove the others? To stay true to using the actual.
You would be covering two different manifestations.
Yeah.
Strictly speaking, however, it's simply a matter of presentation, so.
I mean, it's easier for
right.
users if you include them all, so there if you go to the user thing, but if you're trying to be exact on the use of the ISBN, then you wouldn't.
Right. They were published at the same time, probably using the same publication, prints, galleys, and so on, that the publisher. I would include them all.
Okay.
I would include them all.
That's what
I would
my gut
consider
feeling
them
was.
really the same manifestation, even though one is hardback and one is paperback.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Identifiers for manifestations. As I mentioned, ISBN, ISSNs, and so on. Those assigned by publishers, distributors, government agencies. A government document number, for example, could be such an identifier. Fingerprints, that relates mostly to rare book cataloging. Not URLs.
Yeah.
Examples. 020 ISBN, 022 and ISSN, and so on. Actually, I'm not sure what the old, I don't know what the old 28 is. It's like a government document, I don't know. I don't catalog that kind of material, so I'm not sure what the old 28 is. But the others you'll probably recognize from your work.
If you have the example we were using yesterday with Gone with the Wind and whatever the other one was, if you have those both on the same record, you would have to have two ISBNs or multiple ISBNs.
Although they wouldn't both appear on the record, those would actually signify different manifestations. I don't think that the same ISBN would be included.
No, they would have to be different ones, right?
Right, yeah. Yeah, they would be different records, so yes. Yes. Yeah, there would be a different MARC record for each. Mode of issuance. Again, this relates to the fixed fields M for a single unit or a multi-part monograph. 3-volume monograph. S for serial publication, and I for integrating resource. Again, not different from what we've been doing so far. Title proper. The chief name of a resource, that is the title normally used when citing the resource. The sources are the preferred sources of identification specified in RDA 2.2.2 and 2.2.3, or if no title within the resource, you can turn to RDA 2.2.4 to find out what to do then. And it's what we had talked about before. In most cases, it'll be a title on the title page. If there's no title page, you turn to the cover. If there's no cover, you can turn to the caption or the masthead or the colophon. And further examples or further possibilities are discussed in RDA, but it's unlikely that there are. I guess my title, I suppose, that's the only thing you find. The title page, 245A, is what we have. The title proper transcription, the general guidelines on titles are given in RDA 2.3.1. The principle of representation is don't correct errors for monographs, no more sick, or i.e. give note to explain. Do correct errors, and I mentioned this earlier, for serials and integrating resources to have a stable title. I'm a bit uncomfortable about it, but I know no better way of addressing that problem. You don't really want to have different MARC records each time a serial or an integrating resource changes its title. But what you would do instead, for a monograph, you would transcribe Tuesday's tasks as Tuesday's task, and correct a title. This can be included in subfield I in a 246 to address your concern that the user should know that this wasn't really the cataloger's fault. For serials, you can correct it in the 245. The zoology studies in the 246 subfield I, you would include misspelled title on number 1, zoology studies. That can be done for serials and integrating resources. But for monographs, we take what we see and provide an additional 246. Parallel title proper. Any additional 246 entry. Elsie's practice is to transcribe them all. Again, this is not really all that different from what we've had in the past or from what we've been doing. If there's a spine title, that is quite different everybody knows that book by a different name, but the actual title, I can't think of a good example right now, but there are such instances. This sort of thing would be included also in the 246, actually, or the 240 in that case. Yeah, parallel titles, that's nothing new per se. Statement of responsibility, 245 subfield C, a statement associated with the title proper of a resource that relates to the identification and or function of any person's, families, or corporate bodies responsible for the creation of or contributing to the realization of the intellectual or artistic content of the resource. I love these definitions. They are awkward, but if you make your way through, that's actually a very concise definition of what we are talking about. It really captures all of the different possibilities in which a creator named in 245C could be relevant to the resource that you are describing. If there are multiple statements, you give preference to those identifying creators of intellectual or artistic content. RDA specifies that only the first person has to be cited. Only the first person has to be identified. Although more likely you will find all persons identified and cited in an RDA record. There's no more rule of three. In ACR2 you had the rule of three. If you had 3 editors, you would identify all 3. If you had 4, you would identify the first and ... et al. In square brackets. The square brackets and the use of the Latin abbreviation et al. Goes very much against the grain of RDA. So what RDA says is you identify either the first one and then put in brackets and 3 others, or and 7 others, or how many other contributors there are, or you simply cite everyone as they are cited on the title page. We're no longer restricted to a 5x3 catalog card, so this is definitely possible. We can cite all of them. We can give all of them as additional 700 access points. And yes?
I had some cataloger friends who had this question, and they basically asked, is the rule of 3 going to be considered an option that we can continue to use? No. It's gone.
No, yeah.
Okay.
The three seems arbitrary. So it's either, right, so it's either, if there's more than one, you either name the first and then specify and 7 others, or you cite all of them.
Okay.
But because 3 is an arbitrary number, that makes sense again for card catalogs. That has been abandoned completely. Statements of responsibility entitled proper. A single statement naming more than one person, family, or corporate body, transcribed as found. This is what I was just talking about. No longer the AACR2 rule of 3. The option is to transcribe the first name, give a bracketed summary about information not transcribed. Cataloger's judgment. So name the first, and then put in square brackets and 3 others. You don't need to transcribe to justify additional access points. So you do have the option of simply naming the first author in the 245 subfield C and saying and 3 others, but then naming all 3 additional contributors in 700 fields, in separate 700 fields. You don't have to justify in the 245C. If you want to give the additional 700s, why you would want to include them in the 245, I don't know, but is an option. And examples of that would be Dixon's Disturbing Vineyards, edited by Miriam Segal, Eva Ure, Aubrey Glazer, and Justin Lewis, which, as you see, is all four names included in the responsibility statement. Or, if the if option is applied, edited by Miriam Segal and 3 others. Et al, as any Latin abbreviation, should be avoided like the plague. One more thing on the 245C, and then it might be a good time for a break. And I've mentioned this also before. Statements of responsibilities, including titles of nobility, address, honor, are transcribed as found and are not omitted. This includes initials of society, states of founding, mottos, etc. For theological librarians, one thing that might come up most frequently are the abbreviations relating to monastic orders. OSB for a Benedictine, or SJ for a Jesuit. You would include those. So again, the main principle here is to transcribe what you see. Any questions about recording the 245 according to RDA standards? Yes?
You're saying what you see, but what if it's not there? And I'm referring to Pope John Paul the 23rd, and Pope isn't there. Do I add it?
Not in the 245.
No. Good.
Not in the 245. In the 100,
In the
you
100.
would use the authorized access field.
Okay, but not in the
But
245.
not in the 245. In the 245, you would transcribe what you see.
Okay.
Or even if it says Karol Wojtyła, you would transcribe what you see.
Exactly what
But
it
you
said.
would put Pope John Paul II in the 100. Yes?
In ACER 2, we used to have the prescribed sources of information. So the title and statement of responsibility, if it wasn't on that source, I'm guessing it was the title page, the chief source of information, then you had to put it in square brackets. Now, that's gone with RDA, is that correct? There aren't those prescribed sources.
If it is within a preferred source of information, and that is expanded beyond the
Okay.
title page, you don't have to include it in square brackets.
You don't, okay.
If you supply from an outside resource, you do.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, then I would say let's take a break. 2 minutes, 15 minutes. Let's meet back here. I'd say 12 minutes. That's a good compromise. Okay. We'll meet back here at 10:43.